The message didn't begin with words. It began with screaming. Not the kind you hear over a comm channel when a hull breaches or a reactor goes critical. No, this was layered, raw, desperate. Multiple voices collapsing into each other, a chorus of panic clawing through static. Then came the translation filter, struggling, choking, trying to turn terror into language. Anyone, please, they are here, they don't negotiate. The signal cut. Across the Orion arm, thousands of listening posts registered it. Most dismissed it as another fringe colony succumbing to piracy, rebellion, or the slow grind of entropy that swallowed weak civilizations. Empires had learned long ago that desperation was the most common sound in the galaxy. But one system didn't ignore it. Soul. Humanity didn't respond immediately. That alone should have been a warning. Because when humans hesitated, it wasn't fear. It was calculation. 3 days later, the signal came again. This time, it was clearer. They're harvesting us. The voice whispered, hoarse and hollow. Not killing. Not enslaving. Harvesting. We were wrong. We thought they were traitors, they smiled. A wet, choking laugh followed. If anyone hears this, don't come, they want you to. Static swallowed the rest. In the high council chambers of the Zarinth Coalition, the reaction was predictable. They are exaggerating. One diplomat clicked, mandibles tapping irritably. Every species believes its suffering is unique. Or bait. Another added. A trap to lure in opportunists. Either way, a third concluded. It is not our concern. Votes were cast. Files archived. The signal marked as non-actionable distress. The galaxy moved on. Except for one quiet, stubborn species that had built its entire history on a refusal to move on. Earth didn't send diplomats. Earth didn't send warnings. Earth sent a single ship. That was the second mistake. Because anyone who had studied humanity knew one thing. When humans sent one ship, it was never just one ship. The vessel didn't look impressive. It drifted into Coalition space like a relic, scarred hull, mismatched plating, engine signatures that flickered like a dying star. It barely registered as military grade. Human junk, one Zarinth officer scoffed, observing it from a patrol cruiser. They crossed half the arm for this? But sensors told a different story. Mass readings fluctuated. Internal compartments shifted impossibly. Energy signatures pulsed in patterns that defied known physics. It was wrong. Uncomfortably wrong. The ship transmitted a simple message. Coordinates received. Situation under review. No threats. No demands. No diplomacy. Just acknowledgement. Then it went silent. The attacked world, Keltar 9, was already dying. Orbital cities burned in slow arcs, debris raining into the atmosphere like molten snow. The attackers hung above it, vast and elegant, their ships smooth and organic, like living things that had decided war was simply another form of feeding. They called themselves the Velthri. They didn't conquer. They consumed. Entire populations processed into biomass, memories stripped, identities erased, converted into something the Velthri referred to as nutritional continuity. Efficient. Clean. Inevitable. At least, that's what they believed. When the human ship arrived, it didn't announce itself. It simply appeared. No warp signature. No approach vector. One moment empty space, the next, it was there, hanging just beyond the debris field like it had always belonged. Velthri sensors reacted instantly. Unknown vessel. Their central intelligence pulsed. Biological classification irrelevant. Threat assessment negligible. A smaller Velthri craft detached, gliding toward the human ship with predatory grace. Inside the human vessel, Captain Elias Varn sat in silence, watching the feed. He looked tired. Not scared. Not tense. Just tired. How many? He asked. A younger officer swallowed. Preliminary scans estimate 200 million survivors on the surface. Maybe less. The rest. He didn't finish. Varn nodded slowly. Right, he said. So we're late. The bridge was quiet for a moment. Then someone muttered, Story of our species. A few grim chuckles rippled through the crew. Dark humor. Always dark humor. Varn leaned forward, elbows on his knees. All right, he said softly. Let's see what we're dealing with. The Velthory craft opened communication. We acknowledge your arrival. Their voice echoed, smooth, pleasant, almost warm. You have traveled far. You will be processed efficiently. On the human bridge, someone snorted. Did it just thank us for showing up to die? Polite bastards, another replied. Varn didn't smile. Patch me through, he said. The channel opened. For a moment either side spoke. Then Varn leaned back in his chair and sighed. You know, he said, voice calm, almost conversational. We got your message. A pause. Distress signal, he continued. Pretty ugly stuff. The Velthory responded without hesitation. Suffering is a temporary state. Integration is permanent. Varn tilted his head. Yeah, he said. We figured you'd say something like that. Another pause. Then his tone shifted, just slightly. Here's the thing, he said. You made a mistake. The Velthory didn't react. Clarify. You broadcast your harvest, Varn said. You let the galaxy hear it. That was intentional. I know, Varn replied. That's the mistake. Silence stretched across the void. Then the Velthory spoke again, a faint edge entering their voice. You are one vessel. We are many. Your extinction will be brief. Varn smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Yeah, he said. About that. The human ship moved. Not forward. Not backward. It unfolded. The hull split along impossible seams, segments rotating, expanding, rearranging like a puzzle that didn't obey geometry. What had seemed like a single vessel began to multiply, not physically, but dimensionally. Sensors screamed. Mass readings spiked. Energy levels surged beyond measurable limits. What is that? A Velthory node pulsed, for the first time registering something close to uncertainty. Inside the human ship, ships, now plural, the crew strapped in. Phase transition at 60%, an officer reported. External anchors holding. Good, Varn said. Let's wake it up. Sir? The younger officer hesitated. Once we do this, there's no going back. Varn glanced at him. Kid, he said quietly. There was no going back the moment we listened. Across the battlefield, something impossible began to take shape. The single human vessel wasn't alone. It had never been alone. It was a seed. And now it was blooming. From folded space, from hidden dimensions, from places that didn't technically exist, ships began to emerge. Not dozens. Not hundreds. Thousands. Each one different. Each one scarred. Each one carrying the quiet, lethal weight of a species that had spent centuries perfecting one simple philosophy. If you're going to fight a monster, become something worse. The Velthory adjusted their threat assessment. From negligible to unknown. Then, for the first time in their recorded existence, to dangerous. On the human bridge, alarms faded into a steady hum as systems stabilized. Varn stood. All right, he said, rolling his shoulders. Let's not drag this out. He opened a wideband channel, broadcasting across the entire battlefield, Velthory, survivors, anyone still capable of listening. His voice carried, steady and unhurried. You wanted attention, he said. Congratulations. A beat. You've got ours. The Velthory responded immediately, their tone sharper now, less certain. You are interfering with an ongoing harvest. Withdraw, and you will be spared integration. Varn actually laughed. It wasn't loud. But it wasn't kind. Spared? He repeated. That's generous. He stepped closer to the console, eyes hard. Let me explain something, he said. We heard your little broadcast. The screaming. The harvesting. His jaw tightened. And we don't like it. The Veltri ships shifted, formations tightening. You do not understand our purpose. Varn nodded slowly. No, he said. We understand it just fine. Another pause. Then, softly. We just don't care. The first shot wasn't fired by the humans. It was fired by the Veltri. A beam of coherent energy lanced across space, striking one of the newly emerged human ships. It should have obliterated it. Instead, it passed through. The ship shimmered, distorted, then snapped back into place like reality itself had rejected the damage. On the human bridge, someone whistled. Still weird seeing that work, they muttered. Varn didn't look away from the screen. All right, he said. His voice dropped, cold and final. Now it's our turn. And somewhere, buried beneath layers of instinct and collective certainty, the Veltri experienced something they had never known before. Not fear. Not yet. But the beginning of it. Because the beings they had invited, the ones who answered the desperate plea, were not rescuers. They were something far worse. And they had just arrived. The Veltri learned quickly that human silence was never empty. It was preparation. The moment their first strike failed, their command lattice erupted into overlapping threat matrices, each node attempting to reconcile an impossible reality, matter that refused destruction, ships that existed partially outside measurable space, and a human fleet that didn't behave like a fleet at all. It behaved like a system. Worse, like a habit. A recurring mistake that had gotten very good at correcting itself. Recalibrate weapons, the Veltri warsinger commanded, voice tightening. Increase output. Strip their shields layer by layer. A chorus of confirmations answered. Then the second volley fired. This time, they didn't aim at ships. They aimed at space itself, gravity-shear weapons designed to tear orbital geometry apart, collapsing trajectories into violent mathematical impossibilities. It should have ended the anomaly. Instead, something answered. Not a counterattack. A correction. Human vessels began to move, not in formation, but in reaction. Like reflexes triggered by muscle memory older than language. One ship drifted forward, rotating lazily as if bored. Vanguard unit engaging, a calm voice reported. Vanguard? Someone on the bridge muttered. That's just Dave. He's a logistics captain. Dave's ship is classified as Vanguard? Another asked. A pause. Dave requested the upgrade. Varn exhaled through his nose. Of course he did. The logistics ship opened its belly. The Veltri expected weapons. They received architecture. Structures unfolded, vast, rotating rings of hard light and tungsten lattice, each spinning at orbital velocities that bent perception. Inside them, something older stirred, human-built swarm engines, originally designed for asteroid mining. Now repurposed. Weaponized patience. The rings fired, not beams, not projectiles, but organized debris fields moving with mathematical precision. Each fragment found a target. Each target stopped existing in a way that mattered. Veltri Command struggled to respond. These are not military vessels, one analyst insisted. Their designations are inconsistent. Some are civilian. Some are mining rigs. Then why are they behaving like coordinated dreadnoughts? The warsinger demanded. A pause. A softer voice answered. Because they are human. No one argued after that. On the surface of Kultar 9, survivors watched the sky change. For days, they had seen only Veltri perfection, clean arcs of destruction, efficient harvesting beams, cities turned into silence. Now, something else moved above them. Chaos. Beautiful, structured chaos. One survivor, an old engineer named Marek, stared upward through fractured glass and whispered, "They brought everything." His daughter trembled beside him. "Everything?" Marek nodded slowly. "The humans," he said, voice cracking. "They didn't send an army." A distant explosion rippled through the sky like thunder in space. "They sent their life." In orbit, The Velthari attempted adaptation. They shifted tactics, transitioning from brute force to assimilation fields, attempting to overwrite human systems rather than destroy them. It was a strategy that had never failed them. Until it touched a human ship. The moment the assimilation wave made contact, something unexpected happened. The wave hesitated. Not physically. Conceptually. As if it had encountered something it couldn't categorize. Inside the human vessel, alarms flickered once, then stabilized. A technician frowned at the readout. "Huh," she said. "It's trying to classify us as biomass again." Varn didn't look up. And it's getting confused. A beat. Then, quietly. "Sir, it's asking if we're already dead." The bridge went still. Then Varn leaned back. "Well," he said, almost amused, "that's new." The Velthari warsinger felt it then. A fracture, not in their ships, but in their certainty. Humanity wasn't resisting assimilation in the traditional sense. They were refusing definition. Every attempt to categorize them resulted in contradiction. Military units that behaved like civilians. Civilians who operated weapon systems like they'd been born inside them. Machines that responded like pets. Pets that had strategic doctrine. It was not chaos. It was deliberate contradiction at scale. "Focus fire on command vessel," the warsinger ordered. Multiple fleets converged on Varn's ship. It should have been the end. Instead, the human flagship responded with a signal. A simple one. A handshake protocol. The Velthari intercepted it instantly. "Trap," one node warned. "Or surrender offer," another suggested. The warsinger hesitated. Then accepted the handshake. For one brief moment, both civilizations touched. Not physically. Not technologically. But cognitively. The Velthari saw Earth. Not the world. The history. Wars that burned continents before spaceflight existed. Oceans turned into logistics routes for global conflict. Entire generations raised on rebuilding what the previous generation destroyed. They saw something worse than savagery. They saw adaptation under pressure without extinction. And then they saw the doctrine. Not written. Not centralized. But emergent. A living, evolving philosophy. If something threatens survival, it becomes infrastructure. The connection snapped. The warsinger staggered. "What are they?" it demanded. No one answered immediately. Then a junior node whispered. "They are what survived all their answers failing." On Varn's bridge, the lights flickered once. "Did they just peek?" someone asked. "Yeah," Varn said quietly. "They did. And?" He stood slowly. "And now they're going to make a mistake." The Velthari changed strategy again. This time, they stopped trying to destroy human ships. They targeted the system behind them. Supply lines. Communication relays. Data echoes. Any structure that suggested coordination. They believed this would isolate the humans. Break their cohesion. Starve the anomaly. But humanity didn't lose cohesion. Because humanity didn't have cohesion. It had redundancy. A new fleet emerged from subspace. Not military. Not industrial. Not even governmental. It was administrative. Office structures converted into command nodes. Emergency response networks repurposed into fleet coordination systems. Old colony transport barges now carrying layered sensor arrays. One Velthari observer processed the data and whispered. "They turned bureaucracy into warfare." Another corrected. "No." A pause. "They turned survival into bureaucracy." The first human counteroffensive was not loud. It was inevitable. Velthari harvest fleets began receiving contradictory orders from their own systems. Navigation paths looping into non-Euclidean geometry. Assimilation routines rewriting themselves into maintenance protocols. Confusion spread. Then panic. Then something even worse. Velthari's ships began refusing commands. Not because they were hacked. But because the human systems had introduced a concept foreign to them. Optional obedience. On Keltar 9, survivors watched the sky burn in reverse. Vel-3 harvest beams flickered, stuttered, collapsed. Ships that once moved like certainty now drifted like hesitation. Marek held his daughter tighter. "They're not just fighting," he whispered. "What are they doing?" she asked. He watched as a Vel-3 vessel suddenly redirected fire away from a human evacuation corridor. And fired at nothing instead. "They're convincing them," he said. In orbit, Varn received the report. "Vel-3 cohesion dropping 40%, a technician said. "Their command structure is arguing with itself." Varn nodded. "Good," he said. A pause. Then he added, "Now they understand the first rule." Someone looked up. "Which is?" Varn stared at the burning battlefield. "That we don't fight wars," he said quietly. "We end them." And deep within Vel-3 command space, something ancient and unspoken finally surfaced. Not fear of death, but fear of comprehension. Because they were beginning to realize. They hadn't encountered a species. They had encountered a method. And methods don't negotiate. They spread. The Vel-3 did what all predatory empires eventually do when they meet something they cannot neatly digest. They escalated. Not because escalation was effective, but because retreat was unthinkable. Their warsinger dissolved half the fleet's restraint protocols in a single command pulse. Entire wings of harvest ships shed their efficiency constraints, revealing what they had always been beneath the elegance. Not harvesters. Not engineers. But hunters that had never needed to evolve restraint. For the first time since arriving in this sector, the sky above Keltar 9 stopped looking like a controlled operation. And started looking like a storm deciding where to fall. Human fleet integrity holding at 87%. A Vel-3 analyst reported. But their formation coherence is increasing. That is not possible. The warsinger snapped. It is, the analyst replied, voice tight. Because they are not forming a formation. They are forming patterns of response. The warsinger turned. Explain. A pause. Then. They are predicting us faster than we are acting. On Varn's bridge, the atmosphere had changed. Not panic. Not urgency. Something colder. Focus. The kind of silence that happens when everyone stops pretending they are observers and accepts they are participants. Vel-3 just dropped all restraint filters, a tactical officer said. Varn nodded. So they're done playing elegant. Meaning? He looked at the hologrid, where enemy fleets were now clustering like tightening jaws. Meaning, he said, they're going to start trying to win quickly. A bitter chuckle from somewhere behind him. Ah. The classic alien mistake. The Vel-3 strike came as a three-layer collapse. First, gravity inversion fields designed to pin human vessels in place. Second, bioresonance pulses meant to disrupt nervous systems, even synthetic ones. Third, assimilation cascade arrays, synchronized across 12 fleets, designed to overwrite command cognition itself. It was, by their standards, flawless. A symphony of extinction. For 3 seconds it worked. Then the human ships did something the Vel-3 had not accounted for. They stopped resisting. Every pinned vessel accepted its position. Every disrupted system stabilized into passive mode. Every assimilation pulse was received. The Vel-3 warsinger blinked. What are they doing? It demanded. A junior node answered hesitantly. They are complying. A pause. That is impossible. And then the impossible got worse. Inside the human fleet, systems synchronized. Not through command. Through recognition. A shared protocol activated, ancient, buried deep in every colony ship, every mining barge, every emergency evacuation craft ever built. It had a name once. Now it was just known as Protocol if taken. And it did one thing. It recorded everything. Then mirrored it back. The Vel-3 assimilation cascade entered human systems fully. And found itself reflected. Not blocked. Not corrupted. Mirrored. For the first time in Veltri history, their own doctrine of absorption was turned inward. Their fleets began receiving their own commands as feedback loops. Harvest instructions became logistics schedules. Assimilation matrices became maintenance routines. Command authority began dissolving into administrative redundancy. The Veltri did not lose ships. They lost meaning. "What is happening to us?" the war singer demanded. A senior analyst stared at the data, horrified. "They are not resisting assimilation," it said slowly. A pause. "They are normalizing it." Silence. Then, "They are making us operationally irrelevant." On Keltar 9, the sky changed again. Velthri's ships began to drift apart, not due to destruction, but disinterest. Their targeting systems stopped prioritizing human vessels. Not because they were jammed, but because they were being reclassified as non-threat infrastructure. Marek watched it unfold, disbelief tightening his voice. "They're ignoring us." His daughter frowned. "That's good, right?" He didn't answer immediately. Because he understood something the galaxy was only now learning. Being ignored by a predator wasn't mercy. It was worse. It meant you had stopped being food and started being background. Then humanity corrected that assumption. Varn stood. "Release secondary doctrine," he ordered. A technician hesitated. "Sir, that's escalation class authorization." "I know," Varn said. A beat. Then quieter. "That's why we brought it." Across human vessels, dormant systems activated. Not weapons. Not shields. Something older. Something bureaucratic. Velthri sensors screamed as entire sections of space began to reconfigure into structured grids of enforcement geometry. Territory was being defined. Not conquered. Filed. One Velthri officer whispered. "They are zoning the battlefield." Another snapped. "That's not a tactic." Then watched as a human fleet physically partitioned an active war zone into controlled operational sectors. And realized. It absolutely was. The human broadcast returned. Not Varn this time. A different voice. Calm. Female. Almost conversational. "Velthri command entities," she said. "You are now operating within restricted jurisdiction." A pause. Then, almost cheerfully. "Please remain where you are while we process your termination request." The war singer froze. Termination request? A new signal entered Velthri systems. Human legal architecture. Military jurisdiction overlays. Rules of engagement protocols rewritten at scale. The war singer stared at the data flood. "This is warfare," it hissed. A human voice, unknown, replied instantly. "No," it said. "This is paperwork." And then the killing began. Not chaotic. Not brutal. Procedural. Velthri's ships found themselves disabled in sequence, not by destruction, but by cascading system audits that locked critical functions under compliance checks. Weapon systems froze under safety validation loops. Navigation arrays stalled awaiting authorization signatures that never arrived. Even escape vectors were held pending. Environmental impact assessments. One Velthri dreadnought, ancient and feared, simply stopped. Functioning mid-assault. A human officer watched it drift. "Did we just bureaucrat them to death?" A pause. "Yeah," someone replied. "Pretty sure we did." But the Velthri were not finished. The war singer initiated the final doctrine. Total consumption event. A last resort. A willingness to burn every harvested biomass reserve, every stored neural pattern, every accumulated consciousness into a single coherent annihilation field. If they could not consume humanity, they would erase the concept of being consumed. Space trembled. And for the first time, human systems hesitated. On Varn's bridge, alarms flared. "Sir," a technician said quietly, "they're compressing everything into a single collapse field. If that goes off..." "I know," Varn said. He looked at the projection. At the Velthri Armada. At the burning world beneath. At the survivors who had sent the signal that started all of this. And then he smiled faintly. Took them long enough, he said. A pause. Activate anchor protocol. Every human ship stopped moving. The Valkyrie registered it immediately. Confusion. Then suspicion. Then fear. Because suddenly, every human vessel began anchoring itself to reality in a way the Valkyrie could not match. Not physically. Not technologically. But conceptually. They were becoming unmovable decisions. The war singer whispered, "What are they anchoring to?" A human voice answered softly through open channels. "To the fact," Barnes said, "that you started this." A pause. "And we always finish what we start paying attention to." The Valkyrie collapse field triggered. Space folded inward. Stars bent. Reality strained. And humanity did something deeply, infuriatingly simple. They refused to be erased. Not with shields. Not with weapons. But with presence. Every human ship, every system, every logistical barge and mining rig and jury-rigged war platform held. And the collapse stalled. Just long enough. Varn's voice cut through the distortion. "You ever notice," he said, almost conversational, "that empires like yours always assume the universe is a buffet?" A pause. "Weird thing about buffets." Silence stretched. "Eventually," he said, "someone cooks the kitchen." And for the first time since their rise across the stars, the Valkyrie understood something unbearable. They were not being fought. They were being outlasted. And humanity had been practicing patience for a very long time. The Valkyrie collapse field should have rewritten the battlefield. That was the doctrine. That was the promise of it. A final, absolute solution, space compressed into a single, irreversible correction where resistance, strategy, and even memory were reduced to nothing but energetic residue. But promises in war have a habit of failing the moment something refuses to accept the terms. And humanity had never been good at accepting terms. The collapse field tightened. Stars bent inward like broken ribs. Entire Valkyrie fleets began to fold into themselves, engines screaming as they tried to escape a geometry that no longer contained exit vectors. And still, the human ships held. Not by force. Not by shields. By continuity. A stubborn refusal to stop existing in the same narrative. "Structural integrity of anchor protocol at 60%. A technician called out, voice strained. "We're bleeding mass coherence across outer hull layers." Varn stood in the center of the bridge, watching the war end itself in slow motion. "Hold," he said simply. A pause. Then softer. "Just hold." Someone behind him muttered, "That's not a command, sir. That's a prayer." Varn didn't look back. "Same thing out here," he replied. Across the battlefield, Valkyrie command fractured. Their war singer, once absolute, now processed contradictory inputs faster than they could resolve. Every attempt to stabilize the collapse field resulted in human systems adapting around it, like water refusing to be cut. "We are losing containment," a senior node whispered. "No," the war singer snapped. "We are winning." But even it could hear the uncertainty in its own voice now. On Keltar 9, survivors watched the sky break apart. Marek held his daughter as tremors shook the ground. "Are they winning?" she asked again, smaller this time. Marek didn't answer immediately. Because he was watching something that didn't make sense. Valkyrie's ships were dying. Human ships were holding. But neither side was retreating. Neither side was advancing. It looked less like a battle now, and more like a decision being forced into existence. Then humanity stopped holding. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just strategically. One human ship released its anchor. Then another. Then 1,000. Like a system quietly removing stabilizers from a structure that had already proven it could stand. The Valkyries sensed it immediately. Hope, cold and instinctive, flared across their network. "They are collapsing," the war singer declared. A pause. Yes, it added. Finally. The collapse field surged. Space snapped inward with renewed violence. Vel-3 fleets surged forward instinctively, trying to survive the narrowing window of existence. And for a brief moment, it looked like victory. Then Varn spoke. No, he said. And everything changed. The human fleet did not resist the collapse. It reframed it. Anchor protocol inverted. Instead of holding reality in place, it began redirecting the collapse itself. Vel-3 sensors overloaded. What are they doing? A node screamed. A technician answered, horrified. They're guiding it. A pause. Guiding what? The technician swallowed. The end. Human ships began to align, not in defensive formation, but in architectural symmetry around the collapsing field. Like engineers surrounding a failing reactor, not to stop it, but to vent it safely. Vel-3 dreadnoughts suddenly found themselves inside controlled corridors of space, their movement constrained not by force, but by design. Human design. One warship tried to break formation. It failed. Not because it was destroyed, but because it was logged. Every deviation entered into a system that automatically rerouted it back into compliance space. A Vel-3 officer whispered, "They are turning our extinction into infrastructure." The war singer finally understood. "They are not fighting the collapse," it said slowly. A pause. "They are making it organized." Silence. Then, almost disbelieving, "They are filing our annihilation." Varn's voice returned across all channels. Calm. Exhausted. Almost kind. "You ever notice," he said, "how everyone thinks the end of a war is a moment?" A pause. "It's not." The collapse field stabilized into structured layers of containment. Vel-3 fleets frozen in controlled entropy pockets. Human ships positioned like keystones in a massive, living equation. "This," Varn continued, "is the end of a process." The Vel-3 warsinger attempted one final override. Total dissolution protocol. Erase all local structures. Erase human interference. Erase even the possibility of containment. It triggered. And failed. Not explosively. Not catastrophically. But administratively. A soft denial pulse echoed through Vel-3 systems. Access denied. Reason, jurisdiction transferred. The warsinger froze. "What jurisdiction?" it demanded. And a human voice answered. "Ours." For the first time in its existence, the Vel-3 understood helplessness not as damage, but as procedure. On Keltar 9, the sky stopped burning. Not because the war ended, but because it had been contained into something smaller. Manageable. Human ships began deploying descent units, not invasion forces, not occupation fleets, but recovery teams. Marek watched as the first dropships descended. He whispered, "They're landing." His daughter looked up. "To fight?" Marek shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "To stay." Varn stepped away from the console. The bridge was quiet now. Too quiet. Someone finally asked the question no one had dared. "What happens to them?" Varn didn't answer immediately. He watched the Vel-3 fleet, frozen, structured, catalogued into containment zones like a solved equation that still refused to feel solved. Then he said, "They become reviewed." A pause. "And then," he added, almost gently, "they learn what happens when you send a harvest signal into a species that doesn't believe in being harvested." The Vel-3 warsinger spoke one last time. Not in command. Not in rage. But in something far more dangerous. Understanding. "We did not lose to your weapons," it transmitted. Varn nodded once. "I know," he said. A pause. "You lost to your assumptions." Silence spread across the battlefield. Not peace. Not yet. But transition. On Keltar 9, Marek finally exhaled. "So," his daughter asked quietly, "are they the most dangerous beings in the galaxy?" Marek looked up at the ships descending through broken sky. At the humans arriving not as conquerors, but as auditors of survival. And he answered honestly. No, he said. There's something worse. A pause. They're the ones who show up when you finally realize you shouldn't have sent the signal. Above them, humanity began its work. Not revenge. Not conquest. Something older. Something colder. Something that had no need for spectacle. Just resolution. Because somewhere in the dark between stars, a desperate plea had gone out. And the galaxy had finally learned the truth it should have never needed to test. When humanity answers a call for help, it doesn't come to save you. It comes to make sure it never has to come again.